There are 9 time periods on the AP U.S. history exam, and of the 9, period 2 covers the longest range of time, from 1607 to 1754. Now, according to the official course description, teachers should spend about 10% of their class time on this time period. So it's twice as important as period 1, but still less important than a lot of the other ones. You could probably skip over it and focus on period 3, where the DBQ begins. The period begins in 1607 with the first permanent British settlement at Jamestown, and it ends in 1754 at the beginning of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War is important because it's really the major cause of the American Revolution. Key Concept 2.1 says, Europeans developed a variety of colonization and migration patterns, influenced by different imperial goals, cultures, and the varied North American environments where they settled. And they competed with each other and American Indians for resources. The main idea of this key concept is pretty straightforward. It's just saying that the European colonists were different from each other, and they were in direct competition with each other. And you can see one of these differences right away. The Spanish, French, and English all occupied different territories in the New World. But it's not just geography. They had different motives for being there. They set up different kinds of colonies, and they were playing a different kind of game. Let's start with the Spanish. They established control over, by far, the largest amount of territory in the New World. So it starts up in the area of the modern American Southwest and Florida, down through Mexico and the Caribbean, through Central America, into most of South America. Portugal had basically modern-day Brazil. And the Spanish were eager to get a lot of gold and silver out of the land. They were eager to set up plantations. They wanted an economic base. So they used slave labor from Native Americans and then eventually from Africans to run these plantations and mines. The Catholic Church is very important in Spain. So Catholic missionaries and other members of the church came to the New World to build institutions and to convert native peoples to the Catholic faith. Meanwhile, the Dutch and French colonies were very different, both from the Spanish and from each other. First of all, they didn't send nearly as many people to the New World. If you know any people from France, you know that the only place in the world that they like is France. So they didn't really send a lot of people to the New World. And if you know any people from the Netherlands, any Dutch people, good for you, because there's about 30 of them in the whole world. So the French and the Dutch don't really settle the way that we think of with the Spanish, even the Portuguese and the English. Instead of sending settlers, the Dutch and the French focused on building alliances with Native Americans, on building trade routes, on navigating waterways. It was that economic gain that over the 1600s and 1700s that would define their empires. But the English were very different from all of the people we've listed, different from the Spanish, the Dutch, and the French. The English sent a lot of migrants to the New World, along the eastern seaboard of the US. And these people came for a variety of different motives. They wanted a new start. They wanted a chance to make money off cash crops. They wanted to escape religious persecution. The British colonies were different from the other colonies and different from each other. So let's start at the top. In New England, the Puritans wanted to establish colonies for religious freedom, and they built them around small farming communities. Just south of them, in modern-day New York, New Jersey, and in Delaware, the Dutch and Swedes built up export economies. Moving further south in the Chesapeake Colonies, so like modern-day Maryland, and south of that in the Carolinas, the focus was on cash crops, things like tobacco. And they populated these plantations of tobacco and cotton with indentured servants, basically temporary slaves, until they adopted the full slave system from Africa. One key difference about the British colonies is that the British really let the colonies start to run themselves. They let them have their own legislative bodies, their own laws. They had local societies to help solve problems instead of just having a top-down approach. They also really didn't enforce British law to the letter. This was a policy called salutary neglect, and it's critical for understanding how the colonies break away in the 1700s. Key Concept 2.1 says, all these colonies, quote, competed with each other and American Indians for resources. So this intense competition led to this whole confusing network of alliances between the European powers and then between the European powers and Native Americans. Sometimes it even led to war. And the most important of these is the one that marks the end of this time period. It's the French and Indian War.